Hello everyone, this is Kat and welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfics. This will be the continuation of Hidden Messages. This will be Part 20, Chapter 20, entitled Confession and Work Study. When Izuku initially decided to betray his friends, he intended to talk to them immediately after the exercise to explain and apologize. However, that plan went out the window when he kissed Katsuki. It hadn't been a long kiss. In fact, they had been interrupted by a drone almost immediately, but it required a discussion. Izuku was impatient as they filled out their ally papers and heard some closing words from the teachers. He knew that many of their classmates were looking at Katsuki and him, but he didn't care much. Talking to Katsuki is his priority. He can worry about his classmates later. Katsuki seemed to agree with him because the explosive boy was pulling him away the second that they were released. They changed out of their hero costumes quickly, and then Izuku was happy to let Katsuki lead him to a less populated place on campus. It wasn't long before they found themselves sitting in the grass under a tree facing each other. They were sitting away from any buildings, somewhere few people wandered to, so they could have some privacy. They knew that if they had this conversation in the dorms, there would be eavesdroppers, and they would really prefer to figure this out by themselves first. It was silent for a while after they sat down, neither of them knowing what to say. There were a million thoughts going through Izuku's head at once, so finally when the silence had become awkward, that he couldn't handle it, he just blurted out the first thing that he could think of. "I'm sorry." "What?" Katsuki had been waiting on Izuku to say something, but he was not waiting for an apology. "I'm sorry for earlier. I mean, not for kissing you, but yeah, for kissing you. I shouldn't have done it then, and not in front of everyone, and oh god, I didn't even make sure that you were okay with it. I'm so sorry, Kachan. It was really inappropriate. I shouldn't have done that." Izuku only looked at Katsuki a couple of times as he talked, before switching to keeping his eyes on a piece of grass that he was fidgeting with in his lap. Izuku was expecting anger, but to his surprise, Katsuki started laughing. His head shot up so fast that he almost gave himself whiplash as he looked up to see Katsuki. The smile on Katsuki's face was breathtaking. There wasn't a trace of anger on his face. Instead, he looked happy, happier than Izuku had ever seen him. "Damn it, nerd. Don't fucking apologize. I've been wanting that for a while now, although in class was fucking unexpected." Katsuki was still grinning, his eyes twinkling with humor. Izuku could feel his heart jump when Katsuki admitted to wanting that for a while, but he ignored it to focus on a different part of his statement. He groaned. "I really didn't mean to do that in front of everyone." Izuku could tell that his face was red, probably making him look similar to a strawberry. "I just got so excited. We managed to be the last two left in the exercise. I was just so happy," Izuku gushed. "No shit, nerd. You really went all out on the damn thing." Katsuki chuckled as he ruffled Izuku's hair. "Well, yeah, but so did you." Izuku looked a bit confused by his wording. "Nah, I went a normal amount of plus ultra. You blew everyone out of the water on this one, Deku. Even me." "What?" Izuku looked at Katsuki with wide eyes. He didn't think he went that hard, but apparently Katsuki thought differently. "I didn't go out and betray all of my damn friends, or collect half of the fucking objects in the damn exercise. I did well, sure, but my performance didn't hold a candle to yours." "Oh." Izuku never expected to have done better than Katsuki. In every assignment so far, they've been getting the same scores, usually turning in the same information. For this assignment, that wasn't really possible unless they were together the whole time, and even then they couldn't share objects, but that does remind him. "I didn't get half the objects. It was only like 10 or something." "Whatever, nerd. You did well." Katsuki was still smiling, but some uncertainty made its way onto his face. "But that's not what I dragged you out here to talk about." Izuku nodded. "Right, the kiss." He took a deep breath. "You mentioned that you've been wanting that for a while now, but so have I. Kachan, I really like you, and, as more than a friend. Izuku rubbed the back of his neck. "I have for a long time. Before UA, even." Katsuki just looked away from him for a long moment, not saying anything. He was still smiling and he looked happy, but it was obvious that he didn't know what to say. Izuku wanted to say something else to help him, but he also didn't know what to say. So finally, Katsuki grabbed Izuku's hands and came up with something. "I only realized it recently, but I think I've liked you for a lot longer than that." He sighed and looked down, but didn't let go of Izuku's hands. "I didn't realize it until the day of that shitty riddle assignment. Shitty Hair pulled me aside and told me to ask you out before Pink Cheeks does, and I obviously didn't handle it well." Izuku couldn't help but giggle at that. Katsuki saying that he didn't handle that well was a massive understatement. That day was a disaster. Once he got his giggles out, he had calmed down and asked the most important question. "What does that mean for us? What are we?" "You're my Deku, and I'm your Kachan." Katsuki shrugged as Izuku raised his eyebrows at him. What? I don't fucking know. You know I'm not good at this shit. Why don't we just go with that for now, and then after the work studies we go on a date? Izuku asked, with hope in his eyes, squeezing Katsuki's hands. A date? It was Katsuki's turn to raise his eyebrows. Yeah, we could go out for dinner or something, a date. Izuku kept his head down, starting to feel a little embarrassed to have asked it all. Katsuki seemed to have picked up on his embarrassment because he squeezed Izuku's hands back and then smiled. If you want to go on a damn date, I'll take you on the best fucking date ever. But, Kachan, I asked you, so I'll be taking you on a date. Izuku couldn't remember ever smiling as large as this. Hell no, Deku, let me fucking spoil you. You can take me on a date later. Izuku's cheeks turned bright red as he got flustered, so he did the one thing that he could think of doing. He tackled Katsuki. They started rolling in the grass and laughing, happier than either of them had ever been. The weekend passed by quickly. Most of their classmates were avoiding Izuku. They had all witnessed or heard about what he did during the exercise, and they weren't too sure what to think about it. Normally Izuku would be upset by that, but he was too busy spending time with Katsuki enjoying the newfound freedom honesty gives. He did spend a little bit of time with Shinso and the Baku squad, as Mina calls them. Mina and Sarah were the only two people in the class that weren't in on his plan during the assignment and weren't avoiding Izuku. They were a bit annoyed at not being included in the alliance, but they were placated when they found that originally no one except Izuku and Katsuki were supposed to be in on it. Shinso and Kirishima figured out that there was a secret plan and insisted on joining, and Kaminari was pulled in by Shinso. Unlike the rest of their classmates, they knew that the relationship between Izuku and Katsuki was very different from what it seemed until this point. On Monday morning, the whole class was buzzing with excitement. Instead of going to class, they were walking to the train station together to all head out for their week-long work studies. The whole class was leaving together, led by Aizawa, even though not everyone was going far. Shinso and Izuku were staying with Aizawa, and Jiro was going to do her work study with Present Mike. All three of them were going to be staying in the dorms for the week, while their classmates will be staying at the hero agencies they're working at. Izuku was excited about the work study. He knew that he'll be learning a lot, but he was going to miss Katsuki. He didn't like the idea that only days after finally confessing their feelings they were going to be separate. Technically, they weren't far from each other, with both of them staying in Musutafu, but they weren't going to have a chance to see each other. He felt a bit bad about the situation that he left Katsuki in. It was one thing for the whole class to hate Izuku. He chose that and could handle it. But Todoroki had been one of the people that had heard their middle school's cover story, and now they were working together in Endeavor's agency. Katsuki had never been one to care about people liking him, but even for him, that situation must be awkward. Izuku tried to explain the whole story to Todoroki before they all left, but he wasn't successful. It made him feel worse about the situation when he realized that he was going to be working with someone that had no issues with what he had done during the assignment. Shinso was easily his closest friend besides Katsuki at this point, and he understood the real story. The only person around that doesn't is Jiro, and they're just living in the same building for the week, not really planning on interacting much. Their goodbyes at the train station were bittersweet and long. Aizawa had to stay at the station until everyone's trains left, meaning that the 3 students that were going back to UA with him had to hang out there as well. Most people were getting on trains not long after they had arrived, but there were a couple of people that were going to go farther, less popular places, that had only 1 or 2 trains heading there a day, meaning that their train didn't leave for a bit. All the people willing to talk to Izuku other than Shinso had been on early trains, so the two of them spent time signing to each other in ASL. There was no reason that they couldn't speak normally, but they felt like practicing, and they figured that they might as well give their classmates a reason to stare, seeing as they were already staring. That was one thing that Izuku was looking forward to this week. No classmates staring at him. None of them to talk to him, but they all picked up on the habit of watching him as if they were waiting for him to do something. Slowly the crowd around him had thinned out, and finally leaving just the people that were staying at UA. The walk back was silent, even as Shinso and Izuku's hands were moving rapidly, still carrying on the conversation in ASL. Present Mike met them as they entered the campus. After a quick conversation, Jiro and Present Mike had left. Their internship was finally starting. Izuku didn't know what he expected to happen, but he shouldn't have been surprised when Aizawa dragged them to the gym. He brought them to the obstacle course that Izuku had been running to train his quirks, and he knew that Shinso had also been running it during his training with Aizawa, so they both had a bunch of experience with it. You'll be running this course until you can both get through it in less than 5 minutes. Once you can do that, you'll be able to join me on patrol. If you don't manage it today, you'll keep going tomorrow, and the next day, until you can manage it. Midoriya, as I mentioned when I offered you this work study, you're not allowed to glow. If I see you light up green at all during the run, that run will not count. Aizawa informed them. It really wasn't too crazy of an ask. Aizawa can run the course in 2 minutes, and Izuku's best time is 7 minutes, so it makes sense that they need to speed up before being able to actually handle a patrol with a Razorhead. Their first run-through wasn't bad. They each beat their previous records, but they were still at around 6 minutes. By the end of the day, neither of them had been successful, so while the Racerhead went off to patrol that night, they slept. It was probably for the best. Both of them were exhausted. Even if they had managed to complete the obstacle course in time, they would have been too tired to keep up with Aizawa. The next morning they started over, and amazingly, both were able to complete it by lunchtime. Having a full night's rest, it helped a lot, as well as having a desire to not spend their entire work studies running an obstacle course. The next afternoon was spent looking over maps and memorizing the patrol route that they'd be taking that night. The patrol route was made up entirely of places that they had been before, not too far from the school, but the streets look different at night, making it more likely that they'll get lost. Normally, a Razorhead doesn't map out an exact patrol route. He does his best to be unpredictable, taking different routes regularly and changing his route on a whim. However, with 2 students joining him, that would be asking for them to get lost. Izuku and Shinso were so excited to go out on a patrol, only for it to not be very interesting. They ran across rooftops behind a Razorhead, but they only came across a couple of minor criminals. At the end of the night, they were still exhausted, but it didn't feel like they had done very much. Their work studies continued to be boring until Thursday night. It was late, or rather, it was early Friday morning, and Izuku was worried that they would go their entire work studies without doing anything interesting. Throughout the week, his classmates had done some incredible things. Some of them were on the news, others just described the cool things that they did in the class group chat. It was kind of disappointing that the most exciting thing that he or Shinso had done was help capture a couple of robbers. It was pretty basic, except one of the robbers had a quirk that let him make the ground slippery. He wasn't hard to arrest, they barely even had to fight, but they did slip a lot and leave with a few bruises from falling. There was only the rest of Thursday patrol left, and then Friday night's patrol before their work studies were over, and then everything went wrong. They were chasing a villain that had robbed a jewelry store in the middle of the night. They didn't think the robber was going to be too difficult to catch after all. He had seemed like he barely knew what he was doing. Somehow he managed to set off every alarm in the building, including ones on doors that he didn't even need to go through. Even then, he could have gotten away. No heroes were close by, but he didn't even bother to secure the jewelry that he stole, so he was dropping it behind him, like breadcrumbs, creating a trail straight for him. If they had taken a second to think, they would have realized that this robber was too bad at being one. He was making too many mistakes for this to be an accident, but they were all bored after the last few nights, even Eraserhead, so they ran headfirst into trouble. Eraserhead was the first to be caught. A wall of the alley they were in practically reached out and grabbed him, encasing him into the brick like a cocoon. Eraserhead activated his quirk immediately, but he was already stuck, unable to move his head enough to look anywhere other than straight ahead where his students were. He deactivated his quirk as soon as he realized what he had done, but it was too late. Izuku and Shinso were overpowered quickly, neither of them able to use their quirks in that split second that they needed them. Izuku and Shinso were both very good at quirkless fighting. Aizawa insisted that they both trained to fight without a quirk when they started training under him, but their first instinct was to still use their quirk. Aizawa didn't try to train that instinct out of them. It wasn't a bad instinct to have, but that instinct caused them to lose enough time to be trapped in the wall on the other side of the alley that they had run into, facing their teacher. The wall continued to move around them, controlled by some unseen villain. They seemed to know who they had captured, too, because part of the wall had made its way around Eraserhead's face, covering his eyes, while another strand covered Shinso's mouth. The wall thickened around Izuku, obviously trying to account for his strength, but Izuku knew that they had underestimated him. He knew that he could break out of the wall easily. He could crush the whole thing with just a small percentage of One for All, but he wanted to know why he was trapped. As far as he could tell, the alley was empty, but they must have been trapped there for a reason. Even so, he activated One for All. It was barely at 1%, nowhere near what was needed to break apart the wall, but just enough to glow, shedding a bit more light into the alley. Katsuki claimed that his quirk had a sound to it, but at a less than 1%, it was inaudible. The silence was deafening, but he was doing his best to keep it silent. He was listening, waiting for something to alert him as to why they were trapped in the walls out of a random alley. He could faintly hear Shinso's breathing next to him, but while he was concerned about how frantically he was breathing, he couldn't focus on it. He could see Eraserhead's chest moving at a bit faster pace than normal, probably also at least a little panicked at the situation, but he couldn't focus on that either. As the only one of the 3 of them that was able to get out of the wall, and the only one that still had all of his senses intact, it was up to him to do something about it. Finally, after they had been trapped for what seemed like hours, he heard footsteps. He thought about deactivating One for All, but he ultimately decided against it. The steady power bubbling under his skin was reassuring, reminding him that he did have a way to escape. "Well, well, well, what do we have here?" A deep voice had come from just beyond where Izuku's glow reached. He couldn't see the speaker, but the voice had sent shivers up his spine. "I'd been planning to catch a racer like this for a while, but when I saw that he had 2 students with him, I got excited, had to push up my plans." A figure stepped forward. It was impossible to make out much of their features. A dark cloak had covered the majority of them, leaving only their glimmering, sadistic smile visible. The villain stepped forward and reached for Aizawa's face. It took a lot of control to not break out of the wall right then, but Izuku held back. He didn't know if this villain was alone. He didn't know what he wanted from them. He grabbed Eraserhead's face and squeezed his cheeks, laughing that the hero couldn't do anything about it. Izuku couldn't take it anymore. "What do you want?" Izuku tried to keep from yelling, but he struggled to remain calm after watching the villain grab at Eraserhead. He'd almost forgotten that Eraserhead couldn't see them, but when his teacher heard his voice, his whole body had tensed. The villain let go of Eraser's face and turned toward Izuku. As the villain got closer, he could make out more of the villain's face, and he had yellow eyes and a sinister smile. His face was sharp and bony, with almost no fat on him at all. The villain leered down at him, his height making Izuku feel small. "You know, I wasn't too sure that this wall would be enough to hold you." The villain knocked on the wall near Izuku's head. "But with all 3 of you captured, you can't risk breaking your bones now, can you?" The villain laughed. "You see, Stain had the right idea, killing heroes. The thing is, I don't think there's any good heroes at all. You all deserve to die." The villain grabbed Izuku's face, squeezing it tight as he laughed. "Every last one of you." Izuku could hear Shinso struggling next to him, and behind the villain he could faintly see Aizawa trying to get free. He knew that he needed to act soon to get them out of there, but he still didn't know if there was anyone else helping this villain. He debated whether it would be better to break them out or wait longer as the villain moved on to stand in front of Shinso. "Not sure who I should start with, though. Should I force Eraserhead to watch as I murder his students in front of him? Or should I force his students to watch him die? Such a hard decision." The villain walked over to stand in front of Eraserhead. Izuku had taken that opportunity to try to get a message to Shinso. There was absolutely no way that he should be able to understand him, but he had no other options. He wasn't using the language he had made with Katsuki, not exactly, but he was using something similar. He honestly had no idea why he was even trying, but he had to do something. "When I break apart the wall, I need you to try and use your quirk. The villain likes monologuing, so use my voice. I'm going to free Aizawa. Be prepared to run." Izuku repeated his message a few times. He hoped that Shinso would figure it out, or at least follow his lead. Izuku took a deep breath and then upped the percentage that he was using. With the slightest move, the entire wall shattered. As Izuku's voice rang out from beside him, Izuku was moving. As he went to kick the wall that was holding Eraserhead, the wall had moved to meet him, capturing his foot. With his foot stuck in the wall, he was off balance, but he was still able to dodge an attack from the man that was coming at him from the shadows. He could faintly see the original villain standing still over by Shinso, but he wasn't at a great angle to tell what was happening over there. He upped his percentage just a bit, yanked his foot from the wall, shattering it in the process. Eraserhead was finally able to pull himself free and capture the second villain with his capture weapon in the same motion, effectively ending the fight. They both turned to the villain that Shinso was dealing with, only to find him caught in Shinso's quirk. "You were right. He really does like to monologue," Shinso supplied as Eraserhead pulled out some cuffs and called it in. "Wait, when did Deku tell you that the villain likes to monologue?" Eraserhead looked up from his phone to ask. "Right before he broke out of the wall. Did you not hear him?" Shinso asked, looking between Eraserhead and Izuku. Izuku froze, with confusion all over his face. "I didn't say that out loud." His eyes were wide as he made eye contact with Shinso. "What?" Eraserhead looked done with the whole situation. "But I heard you say something. It wasn't complete sentences or anything, just a few words, but I was able to figure out what you meant by them." "You understood me?" Izuku was shocked, but the arrival of the police had kept them from discussing it any further. They filled out reports and handed over the villains to the police. Before long, they were sent back out on patrol, but Eraserhead did not have them continue their route. He led them straight back to UA. As they got to the gates, Izuku and Shinso both stopped. "Why are we ending patrol so early?" Izuku asked. "Come on," Aizawa sighed. Within a few minutes they had found themselves sitting on the couch in their dorm common room. Aizawa sat on a couch facing Izuku and Shinso, but he didn't say anything for a while. No one did. Finally, Aizawa spoke. "I want to apologize for that situation and for ending patrol early." He sighed. You both did well out there, but you shouldn't have been in that situation to begin with. I should have noticed that it was a trap, but I also should have done more to get us out of it." Aizawa bowed his head. "I ended patrol for 2 reasons. The first and most important reason was that I did not trust myself to keep you both safe for the rest of the patrol." Shinso dove across the space between them to hug his dad. Aizawa caught him and returned the hug, but tried to remain professional as he continued talking. "The other reason was because of what happened there, how you two communicated. We need to be sure that neither of you are under the influence of any sort of quirk." Shinso pulled away to look at Izuku in alarm, obviously not having thought about it. "I don't think we are," Izuku said slowly. While they were on their way back, he had been thinking about it, and he remembered something about the assignment that might help make sense of what happened. "What?" Aizawa quickly turned away from his son to look at him. "Shinso, during the assignment, when we were all fighting in big groups, did you ever hear me tell you to watch out for something or when to dodge?" Izuku turned away from Aizawa to look at Shinso instead. "Yeah, Denki and I were talking about it after. We thought it was weird that during the fights you were able to warn us about stuff, but no one ever changed their attacks." Shinso's eyes widened. "Wait, you mean you didn't say any of that out loud?" "No, I was using the language that Kachan and I made up. I figured that it wouldn't hurt to use it to try to warn you, even though there was no way that you would understand it, except apparently you did." Izuku was confused, but apparently so was everyone else. "So you were saying that this happened before?" Aizawa was looking between the two of them. "Yes, I think so," Izuku nodded. "Okay," Aizawa sighed. "We will keep talking about this tomorrow. As long as you both are fine, and neither of you are under the effect of a quirk, I'm calling it a night. We all need some sleep after that." Izuku was going to argue, wanting to keep talking about it, but he noticed that Aizawa was pulling Shinso closer and fiddling with the ring on the chain around his neck. He wanted to be with his family now, and Izuku wasn't going to interfere with that. "Good night." Izuku nodded at both of them before making his way to his room, exhaustion hitting him once the adrenaline was gone. All right, everyone. This concludes Chapter 20 of Hidden Messages. Chapter 21 will be next. I hope you all are still enjoying this one, and as always, thank you so much for listening.